senior policy analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. He's in D.C. He's really good. Nathan, what's in your sourcing and the people you talk to down in D.C., what's the feeling today about what happened to the Democratic ticket over the last 24 hours?
Well, I mean, look, there's been a lot of pressure on President Biden over the last couple of weeks to drop out. And, I think this just culminated with this effort that, Vice President Kamala Harris has filled that void. Now, look, she's not the nominee. That doesn't happen until either there's a virtual roll call or to the convention. But we've seen so many endorsements over the last few hours and, just so forth that, we're presuming that she is the nominee in our research and our notes. And so we put out actually a big note on the terminal this morning talking about what would life be like under a Harris presidency. And it's a lot of status quo for banks, EVs, big tech, and so forth like that. The one caveat is on taxes. We've often said that this election is really, the two major things about this election are tariffs and taxes. And Kamala Harris's record in her tax, aspect of it has been a little bit more, I'd say progressive than what President Biden has said. But ultimately, we viewed we viewed President Biden as moving more towards Kamala Harris's policies when he became president, rather than Kamala Harris moving towards Biden's policies. So a lot of this, if she becomes president, will be status quo.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I was going to ask, where is Vice President Harris farther left than President Biden? Where is that biggest daylight?
So the one thing that we actually hung down on was her record as Attorney General. And, just indicative of one of her actions is she joined about 47 other states, including the District of Columbia, on a $25 billion settlement on home foreclosure practices. And a lot of her campaign speeches when she was running for president in 2020 was talking about how she took on big banks. Now, to us, that means there's a lot more consumer protection coming in the cards, whether it's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or whether it comes through acts of Congress, or maybe it's even executive orders like continuing President Biden's student debt relief plan. But I think there's going to be a lot of focus on this idea of low to middle income consumers, protections against big corporations, and a lot more in terms of disclosures and so forth like that. Now, is this a material impact on big tech or on the big banks? Probably not. A lot of it has to get passed through Congress, but ultimately it's certainly a headline risk that I would keep in mind for those sectors is just to keep in mind, that if she were to focus on this, and specifically, let's just pick on antitrust. If she were to focus on antitrust, there's a lot of, intense scrutiny, more scrutiny than she could put there than a Biden administration could.
All right. A lot of my M&A banker buddies are wondering what would a Harris administration mean for antitrust, because Biden's been nobody to the M&A world. Is it feeling status quo there as well?
This is one of those situations where I think whoever wins as president is probably not going to be helpful to your M&A banker buddies, because on one hand, you have the continuation of the Biden presidency with Lina Khan at the FTC and taking a very skeptical look at mergers. I mean, just in the financial space alone, some of these merger reviews go over a year, if not longer. And, we saw certainly with the TD Financial merger, they pulled out as a result of this. But then on the flip side, you have Senator Vance and President Trump. And remember, this idea of economic populism is ramped through that, that RNC agenda at the moment. So, Senator Vance even came down to a Bloomberg event here in Washington and called Lina Khan, the FTC chairwoman, Biden's best pick, and insinuated that President Biden would even or President Trump should even keep her around. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. But unfortunately, Paul, for your M&A banker buddies, I don't think any other way this gets around, whether it's Harris or Trump, it's going to be a very skeptical world for antitrust and M&A.
So Paul's talking to his M&A buddies. I'm thinking about my energy buddies, because one area where it feels like President Harris could be farther left, of course, is energy. I was telling Paul earlier that she's been kind of anti-fracking. She's been anti-offshore. California is notoriously not loving any fossil fuels. How much of that do you think we have to really start considering?
I think it's important to consider it. In fact, our colleague Rob Barnett just put out a note about 40 minutes ago talking about this and the importance it has on the renewables sector. So, Senator Harris, Vice President Harris, certainly has pursued a clean energy agenda. And one of the things we see in, her presidency is a boosting of the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't want to say going back to the Build Back Better 3.0, some of the ideas that were floated around. She'll have her own ideas here, but this idea of the Inflation Reduction Act needs to be protected and enhanced. So if you're in the renewable sector or solar sector, it certainly could be a boon idea if Vice President Harris wins. But I would also just recommend it, or I would also just offer this, that a lot of it also depends on who takes up Congress, because if Vice President Harris wins and the Republicans take one, if not two chambers of the House, then a lot of those initiatives are going to be scaled down and actually dramatically lowered and so forth like that.
All right, but we know Elon Musk is a big supporter of Trump, but it sounds like what would a Democratic Harris administration mean for the Elon Musk of the world and the EVs?
So, for the EV side, I think it's actually a continuation of the Inflation Reduction Act tax credit, if not an enhancement of that. Look, tax reform is going to happen next year no matter what, because the Trump-era tax cuts for individuals expires at the tail end of 2025. And whether it's Vice President Harris or President Trump, neither of them are going to want to increase taxes for low and middle and income, Americans. So for the EVs of the world, I would say under a Harris presidency, you'll certainly have protection from that tax credit in the IRA. You potentially could have an enhancement of that. You certainly will have regulatory policies trying to boost EV usage and so forth like that. Comparing it against the President Trump presidency, where he has said that he doesn't like electric vehicles. Obviously, he has Elon Musk whispering in his ear and providing $45 million a month in PAC funding. But ultimately, I think the Republicans, you probably would see a scaling back of those tax credits. Maybe, just additional, restrictions on EVs and so forth like that. But, with the Trump presidency, we'll have to see if he wins, and also if Elon Musk is whispering in his ear in come January and February.
Taxes. If former President Trump were to get a second term, is there any consensus in Washington, given the makeup of Congress? And I guess we have to see how Congress shakes out. But what, if anything, could a Trump administration get done on taxes?
Yeah, so, the way I think about the tax debate with my colleague Andrew Silverman is really in terms of timing. So the first thing you'll note is the election. If the Republicans take the House and the Senate and the presidency, then they have this opportunity for a reconciliation. This is how they got the Trump-era tax cuts through in 2017. It allows them to actually move forth and enhance or, essentially conduct tax reform, and they can bypass the Democrats. So if the Republicans win the House, the Senate, and the presidency, then this President Trump's idea of lowering corporate tax rates is certainly in the cards. Now, I have seen statements from House Republicans saying, maybe we don't want to do that so much, but I do think that this would be President Trump driving this. Now, if you get more of a gridlock Congress, well, then the power of Congress is going to come out, and the House and Ways and Means Committee, whoever controls it, is certainly going to want to play here and tell the presidency this is what we think. And so if you get a gridlock Congress, a lot of the tax reform or tax relief ideas that are out there are going to be scaled down and narrowed, but with one objective: not to increase the individual tax relief or tax cuts for that individual. If you get President Harris, you may see tax increases for individuals who make greater than $400,000, but I think most individuals in the United States at the end of 2025 probably won't have their taxes altered all that much.
Literally, my head hurts from all the different possibilities. I do not know how you do this, Nathan, on a daily basis with all the individual sectors. Okay, before I let you go, now what? Like, now what are you paying attention for? What is most on your radar now as you go talk to clients?
So, the most important thing for us is obviously, does Kamala Harris become the vice president or the presidential nominee? I think she will. Just remember, the Democrats have to have a virtual roll call to get their person on the ballot for the state of Ohio. I would anticipate that starting in August 1st. Next thing would be, Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick. We're cautioning clients, look, she has plenty of time. She's going to do this in a way that is politically advantageous to her, and she doesn't have to name somebody until the convention in Chicago in mid to late August. So, those are probably the two most important things. But also just remember, on the flip side, the tariff argument for President Trump is real, and it's certainly a risk that I think investors should pay attention to.